Snow dusted the jetway in Missoula when Nora Evans stepped aboard, a worn field jacket brushing her knees, boots scuffed pale by grit and salt. She slid into seat 12F by the cold window and set a faded backpack underfoot, outside the Bitterroot. Mountains rose like unfinished sentences, breath of pine riding the wind. Inside, business class arranged itself into judgment. A glossed tablet snap, a sideways smirk, a perfume cloud that wanted her gone. Claire Holt's smile was airline perfect but brief. "Can I help you find your seat?" she asked, meaning. "Are you sure you belong?" Across the aisle, Ethan Cole adjusted a watch that flashed like ice. "Lottery upgrades," he murmured to nobody. Laura Miles' lashes lacquered, angled her phone, catching Nora in a frame she would later deny posting. The cabin hummed with soft power and small cruelties. Nora rested both hands on the armrests, steady, quiet. A faint scar crossed her wrist, thin as fishing line. She watched plows carve lines in the snow, saw de-icer mist glow under ramp lights. Caught an F-22 nose glint far beyond the commuter gates, as if the night had grown teeth. The smell of jet fuel seeped through the vents. Engines trembled, hungry. And waiting, then the wrong sound. A pinprick of radio static that cut through safety announcements. 2 syllables, then for more, clipped and careful, not meant for passengers. Shadow 1, confirm presence. The wordless shift happened fast. Claire paused mid-step. Ethan's smirk stalled. Laura lowered her lens. The gate agent near the door touched her earpiece as if it had grown hot. Nora did not blink. In the glass, the mountains folded into her eyes until you could not tell where stone ended and storm began. Why are they watching her? What happened next will shock you. Missoula exhaled winter when the cabin sealed, and business class arranged its bright politeness like furniture nobody truly owns today. Nora Evans took a seat 12F, shoulder against cold glass, jacket worn thin, boots scuffed, backpack tucked. Underfoot without ceremony, gently. Outside the Bitterroot Mountains held a hard blue line. Pine clung to her collar, stubborn as memory after long drives. Inside, status announced itself softly through heavy watches. Silk scarves, curated laughter, and glowing screens rehearsed to wake together nightly. Claire Holt stopped beside Nora's armrest, smile polished, eyes measuring. Boarding pass pinched lightly like a question seeking confirmation anyway. "Are you comfortable in this seat?" she asked, the words dressed as help, while the tone carried exclusion across velvet. Nora nodded once, hands steady on armrests, nails short, a thin wrist scar, catching light like wire laid through frost. A great templed. Man adjusted his cuff, pretending disinterest the way people practice when curiosity feels unbecoming and risky to him. Ethan Cole angled his voice for listeners, that smooth founder cadence shaping the air even while saying almost nothing measurable. "Tonight, premium cabins require standards," he told Laura Miles, who filmed herself carefully and pretended Nora was only background texture anyway. "Upgrades ruin a story," Laura whispered, capturing boots and denim, then turning her lens back toward gloss that fed algorithms. Claire placed water on Nora's tray with a clack, then offered bourbon to Ethan and lemon to Laura without hesitation. The aircraft shivered as power rolled through the frame, and a wrong note of static slid beneath the safety. Script? Nora heard it clearly, then evened her breathing, counting quietly like she had on riverbanks at dawn in January mornings. Memory came like weather, not nostalgia. A creek under skim ice, willows leaning. Elk tracks linking loops along a sandbar. Mornings began with a stove ticking, ended with boots drying, and taught a child that silence could act as a force. Stars. Gave north without applause. Stacked clouds warned of trouble. Squeaking snow demanded movement when lungs burned and patience faltered. Those lessons left muscle, habit, and endurance, and they settled now into Nora's calm shoulders, like well-worn tools for keeps. Claire returned with a tote hook, as if the backpack offended design, saying, "We try to keep this area tidy." Nora slid it closer to the frame, thanked her, and watched the de-icer bloom like green fog around a trembling wing. Ethan stacked conversation. Like stones, others must notice, shaping towers of opinion to prove height where substance seemed light today. Montana is pretty for weekends, he told the great pimpled man. But ambition migrates toward markets that bend faster than winters. Laura nodded solemnly, then asked her camera whether it would take good photographs from this angle, while filters polished her expression beautifully. Nora watched breath smoke across the ramp as night tried chewing daylight from the edges like a persistent, hungry animal. Preflight lines murmured overhead, and beneath them crept clipped syllables never meant for cabins where champagne classified experience too neatly. Claire misread Nora's stillness as nerves, offering the forward galley as refuge that sounded gentle yet translated as exile anyway. "I'm fine," Nora said, voice even, eyes steady, posture unreadable, unless you understood how bodies store training beneath silence too. Taxi lights stitched a path between snowbanks, the runway flattening. Ahead, a dark spear pointing toward a thin horizon tonight. A boy in a dinosaur hoodie peered between seats and asked, "Are you a ranger?" His voice was hopeful and bright today. "I take care of places," Nora said. His mother apologized and Nora answered, "Curiosity keeps people alive, always everywhere." Ethan sighed and asked Claire for a reliable network, because his dashboard hated latency more than turbulence or delays combined. Laura curated a caption about grit, while angling her chin toward approval she believed should arrive in steady numbers tonight. Takeoff pressed everyone back, then lifted Missoula into threads and squares, the river sewing snow together with a dark ribbon. Cabin lights softened, and hierarchy returned like reflex. It's an old choreography stepping neatly through towels, menus, and measured smiles again. Claire placed a napkin on Nora's tray with perfect corners and a reminder about choices that sounded, curiously, like limits. Nora read the menu without hunger, asked for water, flexed fingers once, scar flashing like a rule burned into skin. Ethan spoke about valuation cycles and signal purity, about pattern detection, keeping shareholders calm, and always making uncertainty seem provincial. His sentences wore clean shoes. He liked data that obeyed and disliked surprises that arrived. And Denneman stayed unapologetic. Laura filmed her reflection in the window, angling away from seat 12F while pretending the frame never noticed anything inconvenient. Altitude built while memory kept separate time, existing on its narrative regardless of screens, upgrades, or loyal tiers above. A teenage Nora climbed a ridge before sunrise, breath-punching clouds, thighs burning, patience carrying the pack, when strength failed. She listened at a fence to silence so deep it felt constructed, a structure stronger than noise and endless. Far off, a branch clicked under weight, elk not deer, because cadence told the truth if you learned its language. Stars trembled in brittle air, and she separated storm from cold snap by tiny changes shimmering around their edges nightly. She crossed crusted drifts without breaking them, cut steps when a slide meant ice water and long miles home alone. Learned fatigue loses arguments against habit. Practice turns fear into tasks, and tasks require breathing before any motion whatsoever. Back in the aisle, Claire's smile cooled whenever Nora existed inside it, brightness withdrawing like sunlight shaded by cloud cover. "We appreciate our premium clientele," Claire told Ethan, voice bright enough to cast shadows across passengers deemed less essential today. He approved and asked whether partitions might enforce a better experience. While Laura murmured about coherence, symmetry, and brand discipline, words built walls. Nora kept stillness, a steadier shelter than velvet ropes, filtered smiles, or schedules promising curated calm inside. The boy offered a napkin galaxy, whispering for luck, and Nora folded it carefully as if handling delicate field gear. Ethan praised prediction while disliking variance, a contradiction he missed. Then returned to dashboards, awarding certainty through colored numbers anyway. The great impalled man repeated curation, guarding order like fences guard nothing from. Wind crossing miles of unbothered pasture each winter. Nora turned her cup, watching bubbles cling to the rim like thoughts refusing to float, then settling when patience prevailed below. Claire arrived with an extra napkin and a thicker blanket. Placed without comment, a tiny adjustment like 1 degree warmer. Laura frowned because attention wandered, then pointed her lens back toward angles that promised praise, hoping numbers would spike again. She let awareness settle without announcing itself, face unchanged, hands neutral, the way patience holds. Position until information ripens fully. Glances softened. Ethan avoided her eyes. Laura searched the window. The boy offered a napkin galaxy. Nora pocketed it, touched her scar, and let calm occupy space others denied routinely. Have you ever been judged unfairly? Share your story below. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and the aircraft leveled above winter ridges, while talk grew confident. Nora Evans kept her gaze on the window, where the river below carved a dark braid across snow flats, a blunt truth written in ice. de-icer ghosted along the wing route. Rows ahead, the soft ladder of business class found a harsher register. A navy blazer praised minimalism only when it cost more. Laughter moved like frost-cracking bark. Ethan Cole raised his voice and lowered. His mercy, angling his profile for an audience he assumed by default. There is casual, he told a great-apilled neighbor, and there is cheap. He looked straight at Nora's jacket. Some people treat premium like a lottery ticket and expect the room to adapt. Nora turned, face unreadable, voice precise. You don't know what anything costs. The line hit like sleet. Well, he said, I know the look of a budget, do you? Her tone carried the calm of a glacier's edge. Old, packed, able to cut stone without hurry. Something in that evenness unsettled him. His watch offered nothing. Claire Holt arrived with corporate manners polished to a shine. Is everything all right here? She asked. Fine, thanks. Claire set down water for Nora, another bourbon. For Ethan, a lemon slice for Laura Miles, and retreated without picking a side. The hum resumed, but a string had shifted. Outside, the Bitterroot Range fell away in blue bands. Wind combed snow into waves that looked soft from here, and could break a person at ground level. Crust holds until it doesn't. Her knees still remembered. Memory wasn't nostalgia. It was a job that arrived unannounced. Dawn on a slope, a pack heavier than numbers suggested, tools clicking inside quietly. Those were the hours that built her balance. She checked the panel seam along the wing, counted rivets by habit, listened to the careful rhythm of power. Ethan tried to regain altitude. No offense, he said through a smile built of veneer. I'm sure that jacket has a story. Many fieldwork, cold places, tight windows. The great-templed man asked what kind of field. The kind that makes judgment expensive. The answer landed like a crosswind. Laura raised her phone again. The frame trembled. Though her hand pretended to be steady, a boy 2 rows back told his mother the lady looked strong enough to lift a snowmobile. Clouds thickened, then opened. Montana's spine showed itself between veils. A frozen river flashed like hammered metal. Elk tracks looped into a side channel, small arcs drawn with purpose. Nora read the lines the way you read a briefing, pulling signal from static. The captain's voice arrived with trained ease and a notch of caution. A brief operational stop due to airspace and service coordination ahead. Beneath that, a thinner-coated murmur slipped through the vents. Nora adjusted, a movement that looked minor and wasn't. Her chin lowered a fraction. Her hand stilled in a way that turned calm into intent. Claire noticed and misread it as nerves. Ma'am, are you feeling okay? Perfect. Her eyes went distant without losing focus. Backcountry training returned the way winter returns, not dramatic. Only sure. Night on a cut bank above a bend where ice moaned undercurrent. Breath steaming into air so cold it made metal ring. 3 figures in staggered file, red lens lamps off, boot soles testing crust with muted taps. Push too fast, and the snow squeaks loud enough to betray you. A beacon pulsed on her chest, slow and patient. In the canyon, the wind moved like an animal and turned corners with a shoulder. She reached a ridge of stunted fir, checked bearings, and waited for a light that never showed, because silence was the sign. A call had come mid-afternoon, routine at first, then narrow. A pilot overdue near a valley where maps lie and radios. Stutter. Spare batteries rode in an inner pocket, so they wouldn't die before use. The river below wrote the same black sentence it always writes in, winter keep moving or harden. At the saddle, frost glazed the antenna housing. She cleared. A vent with a gloved finger and listened with her ribs. A broken signal rode the wind in shredded syllables. She changed position by inches until the sound fattened into something she could read. 2 numbers, a drifted course, a timestamp, a voice she would never meet. She fed the data to the team and watched their reply carve a new line through the night. Back in row 12, light turbulence tapped the fuselage like a finger on glass. Ethan's drink jumped and spotted his cuff. He called it character, loud enough to share. "You good over there in denim?" "Looks like the budget section followed you," he said. Nora let silence do its work. Materials matter. Performance has a look. She turned at last. So does insecurity. It landed gently and finally. He stared, deciding which part hurt. Laura tried to hide a grin and failed. Claire walked by, gathering glassware, her hand resting a second on the top of Nora's seat back, as if gravity gave directions there. Below, the ground changed. Plowed strips cut a grid that civilians rarely notice. Hangars crouched beyond a line of taxiways. The descent began, shallow, casual to most eyes. Nora felt the choreography and became still in a new way. The boy whispered, "Are we landing somewhere secret?" His mother smiled despite herself. "Please remain seated." During a quick stop, Claire said, voice careful. Ethan groaned about lost productivity, tallying minutes like dividends. Laura tested a phrase for later. "Emergency aesthetics," she murmured, trying it on. The cabin split into impatience and curiosity. Nora breathed like a metronome. Perimeter lights blinked in slow intervals. Far beyond, 2 shapes wheeled. Past a hangar gray clean. Unapologetic patience, absolute. She watched them the way a carpenter watches a level bubble. Wheels touched, reverse thrust groaned. The wing flexed against a pale sky. A line of vehicles waited where airlines don't stage vehicles. Claire repeated the pause and asked for patience. Ethan rolled his eyes and called it theater. Laura pretended indifference while finding a better angle. The door stayed closed. No one boarded. The cockpit gave the simplest truth and stopped. Nora's posture didn't change anymore because it had already become ready. Her eyes mapped angles, exits, faces, light sources, reflective surfaces, and metal that could turn into tools. A coded exchange most people filed as static? She didn't. She let the sound pass through the place where training resides. Ethan crossed his legs and tried one more jab. "Hope the base shop sells better jackets," he said. Bright enough for 3 rows to hear. "You're going to want a warmer personality," she answered, voice cool enough to frost glass. The gray-to-pimpled man snorted despite himself. Lost the struggle with her smile. Claire came back, read the air, and asked for calm, as if calm hadn't already found one to F. The engines idled. Outside, winter light sharpened toward steel. 2 jets slid by at a distance that felt closer than it was. Lines mathematical, tempo exact. Nora kept still the way a held note keeps still. She didn't lean. She didn't lift a hand. She occupied the seat as if it had been built for her frame. Conversations fractured into pieces. Someone whispered that the stop felt like a movie. The boy asked if secret places have different clouds. The aircraft rolled to a quiet corner of the ramp where nothing happens without purpose. Nora's reflection merged with snow and aluminum.
Found the scar on her wrist. Looked like a thread sewing 2 worlds together.
She counted the subtle changes in engine note, the cadence of calls, the posture of a ground crew whose boots told better time than clocks. Breathing slowly, pulse steady, eyes open. She was already aligned with the next move long before anyone else sensed the page turning. Never felt out of place, but stayed strong. Drop a comment. The aircraft idled on a remote apron where winter cut the air into clean blades. And the first heads turned as 2 gray shapes slid past the windows, with a measured grace that made conversation stumble. People leaned across aisles to look. Phones. Rose and even Ethan Cole paused his running commentary while the woman in 12F sat without fidgeting. Boots planted, gaze steady. Beyond the glass lay a field of hard light and tire tracks pressed into snow-like scars. With the Bitterroot foothills lifting in stacked bands under a sky scraped thin by wind, heat shimmered near the exhaust of a waiting tug, then vanished, swallowed by the cold before it could declare itself. Claire Holt lifted a handset, spoke to the forward galley, and returned down the aisle with a smile that asked for cooperation while excluding certain people without saying so. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "we have a brief stop to accommodate. A scheduled VIP event on the tarmac. Selected guests may be invited to participate. Please remain seated until we share further instructions." Eyes brightened across row 1 through 5. And Laura Miles adjusted her posture so a camera could capture anticipation without revealing nerves. Nora Evans kept her hands resting lightly, index finger resting near the seam of the armrest, the old scar at her wrist, a pale thread catching the weak light. A man with a newsboy cap and 10C mark read. The name printed large on his baggage tag leaned back and spoke toward anyone who felt like listening. Every time, he said, there's always some stray and premium during military publicity stunts. It cheapens the optic, you know? He shot a glance toward 12F, satisfied with his polish, and added that the uniformed crowd liked clean lines more than charity cases. Nora looked through him and past him, out to the ramp where a pair of maintenance crews moved like chess pieces under floodlights that turned breath into smoke signals. At the far edge of the pad, an F-22 stood angled as if listening, skin the color of a winter stone cockpit shield reflecting a jag of sky. Something about that specific airframe focused her attention the way a whistle calls a trained dog. Her spine lengthened, shoulders set, jaw quieted. She slid a hand under the seat as though adjusting the backpack, fingers brushing fabric until they found a patch sewn inside the lining, hidden from casual inspection. The pads of her fingers traced its outline and emblem, almost worn smooth. By years of friction, not quite visible, absolutely familiar. The outline steadied her breathing, not because she needed comfort, but because ritual brings edges into focus when chaos gathers. Claire moved back down the aisle, stopping beside Mark Reed as if to reward him for participating in the mood she wanted to maintain. "I appreciate your patience, sir," she said. "Invitations will be limited. Our ground partners appreciate discretion." Mark grinned and asked whether influencers counted as partners. Laura pretended to laugh, eyes already calculating sightlines. The door opened to hard cold, and a young officer stepped in with the weather still on his shoulders. Scanning the cabin as if each row held a different code he had to read before the page turned. He moved without show, boot steady, uniform. Square, breath lifting once in the recycled chill. His badge, Red Grant. Stark letters on a field that took light and gave nothing back. He let his gaze sweep the aisle, paused by a glittering watch and Mark Reed's easy smirk, then stopped at 12F, Shadow 1. He whispered, the question shaped like certainty. Nora Evans gave the smallest nod, a motion so contained it could have been a breath. Everything around them tightened without visible hands. Claire Holt glanced from the galley and looked away as if eye contact might set off an alarm. Laura Miles leaned toward the aisle and hissed that it had to be a stunt, the sort you clip into a clean reel. Ethan Cole said bases love theater, probably a mix-up, a borrowed brand slapped on a random traveler to humanize steel. Mark called it a cute mistake and mentioned access lists, as if access belonged to him by pronunciation. The officer's eyes stayed on Nora, not unkind, not soft, only exact. Outside, 2 gray aircraft rested on the apron like tools laid out, for a job nobody wanted to explain. Wind pushed powder across concrete in thin veils, and the Bitterroot foothills held a hard blue line beyond the floodlights. Nora's hands stayed still on the armrests, scar pale across tendons, breath even, unhurried. The overhead speaker coughed a thread of static, then went quiet, like a secret pulling the blanket back over itself. The officer inclined his head, by a fraction, and kept his voice low. Shadow 1. She met his eyes and gave a second nod that said yes, here, present, awake. Laura whispered that the algorithm would eat this. Ethan muttered, the algorithm eats anything.
Ow.
Claire told row 12 to remain seated, her tone polished enough to pass as calm while a new current ran beneath it. Nora's focus slipped through the window and out into a night that lived far from warm cabins and coffee steam. Montana sky rose inside her like black glass scattered with fire. She had learned that sky by miles and scars. On a ridge above a cut bank, she once lay still under cold, so clean it rang like metal when breath touched air. Stars were bright enough to throw shadows off her hand. A pale band of aurora walked the horizon like a shy promise. Far west, a damaged engine drew a weak line through darkness, and two voices on a dying channel tried to hold fear inside their teeth. The call had come fast. Two pilots trapped by failing systems after a training run met interference that erased bearings and ate screens. Fuel fell toward a number nobody wanted to say out loud. Instruments lied, mountains did not. She built a plan the way she packed a rucksack, no wasted motion. Step 1. Put a rescue bird in a clean orbit above a valley that forgives human error. Step 2. Raise the jets on a backup channel and hold them with her voice alone. Step 3. Drag a track across the night big enough for fast machines to find without seeing it. She keyed the radio, pulled the antenna higher, and watched frost smoke from her sleeve. The first pilot broke through with a rasp that cut to bone. The second breathed like a runner swerving toward a wall. She gave them field names that were not on any roster because old names were sinking ships. She fed headings in small bites and tied each bite to a star they could see from a cockpit limp with failing power. "You see the bright nail above the pass?" she asked. "Hold it to your right shoulder and count to 20. They did. She mapped a ditch that ran south to a river, holding heat in thin winter lines, and turned that heat into a beacon only a trained ear would trust. Between transmissions, she lifted her face to the cold and read the sky like a sheet of orders. Orion hauling his belt over a spine she had climbed when her legs were younger, and patience still finding its full size. The rescue bird slid into position, slow and quiet, blades working sober air. She tucked a chemlight behind a cairn where it would not decorate snow, only kiss it with an idea of green. The first jet found the notch and roared through, somber engines loosening as the valley held them. The second nose wandered west when it should have hunted east. She cut her words like wire and pulled him back. "Right 2 degrees, now hold," she said, the calm in her tone doing math the pilot could not do with fuel shrinking and nerves fraying. He slid into open air with heartbeats to spare and let out a word he would never repeat in public. They followed her river of heat to the tanker orbit and lived because she refused to let darkness write their names. Back in row 12, a plastic cup ticked against laminate, reality returning in the polite clink of money, talking to itself. Laura said the officer must have learned a script and picked the wrong person. Ethan said the right people carry a look, and that jacket did not carry it. Mark said he could spot the command from a mile, and 12F did not read the command. The officer did not argue. He regarded Nora as if ordered to find a mirror, and had found a window instead. He lowered his head and spoke for her ears alone.
"Shadow
1, he said again, steadier now. She gave a third small nod that felt like a door unlocking in the air. Claire asked whether Nora wished to move to a quiet space during the demonstration, and Nora said no, her voice like river water under ice. The overhead speaker let out a soft burst like wire singing in the wind, and then whispered a name the cabin could not place. "Shadow 1, confirm presence." Nora did not answer with words. She kept still in the kind of stillness that performs work. Outside, an F-22 flashed its canopy like an eye to the side and waited. The young officer took one step back, posted himself at the end of the row, and watched the aisle with a calm that tasted like training. The boy who had given Nora a folded napkin galaxy peeked through the seats and whispered that the soldier looked like a statue that could run very fast if asked. His mother nodded and told him to sit. Memory did not let go. It carried her too. Another night when she stood on a ridge, counting seconds between pulses and proving that patience can be louder than shouting if you hold it long enough, she checked the wind with a pinch and a toss. The flakes fell straight as nails. She checked her team with a glance. Heads dipped in the right places. Boots sank in silence. Every strap taped flat. A flare hissed over a far hill, and she chose to walk toward light instead of away, because panic aims at shadows while craft slips through them. She reached the marker tree with bark stripped by elk, found the narrow ditch she had traced in daylight, and made herself narrower than fear. Above her, the stars did what stars do, burning without asking permission. She carried 2 calceans through the choke point and handed them back to a world that would not remember her name, only that it kept more of its young. The memory ended where the present began. This seemed so clean it hurt. The officer adjusted his earpiece and listened. Whatever he heard sharpened his spine by a degree no one could measure, and everyone felt. Claire set a cup of water on Nora's tray, as if water could help, which sometimes it can. Laura whispered that if this was a setup, it was cruel to the woman in 12F. Ethan started to argue, saw Nora's face, and lost the thread. Mark made a small sound that meant nothing and tried to make it sound like a principle. The cabin learned a new silence. It was not the silence of takeoff or landing or money doing math. It was the silence people make when they sense truth gathering itself in a room. Outside, the mountains squared their shoulders under thin cloud, like men preparing to lift a heavy thing together. A service truck rolled past and left a clean path through the drift that closed behind it without fuss. Nora kept her seat. She did not grip the armrest. She did not lift her chin. She did not smile. She breathed and let breath find the rhythm she had used on ridges, in hangars and in rooms where telling the truth changed nothing and everything at once. The officer leaned a fraction closer and spoke one more time, softer than before, a tone you use when you remove a bandage that stuck to healing skin. "Ma'am," he said, and the word held weight without ceremony's bunk. He did not ask her to stand. He stood beside her. Nora slid her thumb over the hidden patch sewn inside. Her bag and felt worn stitching answer like an old friend clearing a throat. Her jaw set, not hard, just sure. The radio whispered again, words thin as thread and just as strong. Shadow 1. Confirm presence. She looked at the mountains, then at the jet, then at the officer, and the nod she gave was the smallest. Yet, somehow the loudest. Something inside the cabin tipped, and everyone felt the tilt. They did not know what was coming, only that it had already begun. Ever had a moment that defined you? Share below. The door's cold breath knifed into the cabin when the young officer planted himself in the aisle. Eyes steady, jaw set, winter still clinging to his sleeves. He looked once to the windows where 2 gray aircraft waited under a pale sky, then 2-seat 1, 2F, and spoke with a clarity that canceled every whispered doubt. Shadow 1. You're needed on the tarmac. Time seemed to click into a new track. Nora Evans stood, the faded jacket lifting on her shoulders as if canvas could. Remember wind and work. Boots quiet, gaze forward, scar at her wrist catching a shard of light. Claire Holt stepped aside with a reflex born of training. Laura Miles lowered her phone without meaning to. Ethan Cole's smirk died in his throat. Mark Reed's mouth opened, found nothing sensible, and closed. The boy with the folded napkin stared as though watching a constellation assemble itself. The officer's nameplate read Madge. Liam Grant. Letters black and sure. He turned, created a lane without raising a hand, and Nora moved through the hush, past rows that had measured worth in fabric and polish 2 minutes earlier. Cold took the doorway. Jet fuel cut the air. Frost etched the ramp where tires had. Pressed patterns into snow. Beyond the floodlights, the Bitterroot's blue shoulders stood calm and immovable. The nearest F-22 held a hawk's posture, canopy dark, nose canted as if listening. Ground crew paused mid-step as if some chord inside the work had been tuned. Nora stopped at a cross of paint on the concrete, hands to her sides, no theatrics. Only presence. Major Grant stepped a half-pace back, not guarding her, aligning. A pilot came down a ladder, helmet tucked against his ribs. Windburned face solemn. He snapped to attention. Another pilot followed, then another, a sequence that looked like a wave finding shore. Shadow 1, the first said, voice rough. And respectful, ma'am. The second added, eyes straight. The sound ran up the open door and into the cabin, so every doubter heard respect stripped of performance. Nora inclined her head by a measure that returned honor without wasting motion. She looked small against the open field of sky and steel, Yet the space around her felt held, like a ridge line under winter stars. Claire gripped the doorframe and forgot to breathe. Laura hugged her camera as if it might misbehave. Ethan stared. At the jacket he had mocked and understood nothing, except that he had misread a life. Mark studied the floor as if answers were printed there. Wind lifted a sheet of powder and let it settle again. Major Grant's tone carried without strain. Authorization confirmed. Squadron requests acknowledgement for training continuity. Nora gave a single nod. The crew stood taller as though a bar had been set back to its true height. A young pilot stepped close enough for words to carry. "You pulled us off a dead path above Rock Creek," he said quietly. "Night, bad numbers, fuel and free fall. You gave headings when screens lied. You kept us talking until the valley gave us back." Nora did not smile. The softening in her eyes made the cold look kinder. Memory rose clean as mountain air. Montana. It had been a black cutout under a river of stars. Orion dragged his belt low over the pass. A thin green glow walked the horizon like a shy promise. On a slope crusted with noisy snow, she had crawled at a deliberate pace that turned squeaks into silence, breath shallow, lungs burning, mind cool. A beacon throbbed on her chest, slow as a heartbeat at rest. Radio math came shredded, two voices, a drifted course, fuel leaning toward grief. Instruments lying, mountains telling the truth. She climbed a shoulder of rock to lift an antenna above the eddies, listened with her ribs, and found a backup channel like a thread in a dark room. "Hold the bright nail above the pass to your right shoulder," she told the first pilot, "and count to 20. He did. "You'll feel warmer air in the valley cut. Follow that river of heat even if your panel complains." He believed that the calm in her tone summed up what his gauges could not. The tanker rolled into an orbit big as a patient moon. When the second nose wandered, she said right 2 degrees, hold, and widened his future by a canyon's width. The jets drank life and came home shaking. A squadron learned a quieter religion. Listen, correct early, trust the voice that doesn't waste breath. Now the ramp returned, metal ticking softly as cold worked its small changes. Major Grant raised his hand and saluted, exact and clean. "Shadow 1, welcome back," he said, not ceremony, fact. Nora faced the line of pilots, then the aircraft, then the mountain rim. "Keep your heads and you keep your people," she said, voice even, steady as a river under ice. It sounded simple only because it was honed. A ladder rattled. Another pilot descended, visor up, eyes bright with a calm born of hard hours. He halted, offered a salute sharp enough to shave wind. "It's an honor," he said. Her nod returned it without fuss. Memory slipped another page open. A different ladder had waited on a midnight pad chopped flat from windpack. A helicopter crouched, hot breath turning snow to ghosts. A rescued aviator's weight hung across her shoulders. Rotors asked for patience, and she counted beats in her head until timing met lift. The bird rose. The mountains rose with it. The valley below poured black and silver. Her knees shook only when the door slammed, and the sky gave them back. A hand on her sleeve had said, "We owe you more than a coin." She knew coins vanish. Lanes cut in darkness stay. Present time settled around her like a well-fit glove. "Ma'am," Grant said, softer now. "The team requests your words." She could have declined. She let the range steady her instead. "Buy the plan you can trust, not the story fear offers," she said. "Listen to the wind. Listen to the engine's truth. Correct small errors before they sell you large disasters. Maps lie until terrain agrees. Protect the rookie and teach the veteran humility. And when night closes on both sides, speak with the voice that knows who you are." Nobody cheered. Deeper than noise, something aligned. Ground crew moved with a new ease, like muscle remembering form. The two jets made small adjustments on their struts. A marshaller drew symbols in the air for machines that understood dialects of light. In the doorway, Claire's polished tone slipped and warmed when she whispered, "Welcome back," though Nora was still outside. The boy pressed his palms together and tried to stand tall without being seen. Ethan placed his phone face down, as if ashamed to ask it to work. Laura's grip loosened. The camera became a rectangle of glass with nothing to say. Mark Reed's shoulders fell by an inch. He would never admit it. Sun found a slit in the cloud. A bright coin of light struck the nose of the nearer jet. The canopy flashed like a blade. The ramp glittered. The mountains breathed their slow, cold patience. Grant touched his earpiece, nodded. We have to cycle. The weather is closing fast. They'll taxi and clear the pad. He looked at Nora, and for a heartbeat, the strict lines of ranks softened into something almost familial. Thank you for stepping into sight. She answered with a look that told him the work mattered more than the witness. She took one step toward the ladder, not to climb, only to feel the distance between skin and machine drop to nearly nothing. Then returned to the painted cross where she had stopped. Presence was enough. The pilots saluted again, concise, exact, then peeled back toward their aircraft. Engines spooled with a muted whine that filled the ramp and walked up the fuselage skin to the watching cabin. People leaned forward because witnessing is a human hunger. The boy's eyes shone. The grate impelled. Man exhaled as though a pressure suit had unlatched. Claire steadied the door against the push of wind. Nora turned toward the steps. The jacket that had been dismissed now looked like colors earned the hard way. She paused at the threshold, looked once at the range, at the frozen river writing its dark sentence across the flats, at the jets poised in patience, and understood. Again the message Montana had given since childhood. Stand, breathe, choose. She climbed into the warm, sealed world, and for a span of heartbeats no one spoke. Even the air seemed to wait for the latch to click. When it did, a hush rippled through. Rose that had measured status by shine and suddenly found a better instrument. Nora returned to 1 to F without drama. The boy's folded galaxy found her hand. She tucked it into the pocket where field notes once rode. Outside, the aircraft began to roll. Inside, the story people had told themselves about a woman in a worn jacket collapsed, and a truer one took its place. Shadow One had been sitting among them the whole time. Quiet as snow, strong as the peaks, and when called, she stood. Nora returned to 12F as the door sealed, and the aircraft turned from the ramp, carrying a hush that felt earned. Seat belts clicked, jackets rustled. Even the compressors seemed to soften around her. Frost veined the window's edge, and the runway lights stretched into a gold ribbon while the Bitterroot Ridge held steady under a thinning sky. She tucked the boy's folded napkin galaxy into her pocket and eased back, hands quiet on the armrests, scar pale across tendons like a thread drawn through winter cloth. Claire Holt approached with careful steps, smoothing an invisible crease, as if courtesy alone could mend what judgment had bent. "Miss Evans," she said, voice small but steady, "I owe you an apology." "I made an assumption." Nora met her eyes without heat. "You were doing your job," she said. "Do it kinder. Next time." Claire nodded, set a fresh cup of water on the tray like a small offering, and withdrew to the galley with her shoulders lower. Ethan Cole stared at a dark phone, tapping nothing, the flashy watch now quiet against his wrist. Laura Miles hid her camera under a shawl and placed both hands together, a posture part awe, part regret. Mark Reed studied his shoe as though laces. Required urgent thought. The climb resumed, the city thinning into islands of light until only the blunt shape of land remained. Respect arrived without announcement. The gray-templed man who had practiced indifference watched Nora as if learning how to hold still. She kept her breathing even, counting quietly the way she had counted on ridgelines and riverbanks, where a wrong step turns quiet into search. A small voice lifted from behind. The boy leaned forward, dinosaur hoodie bunched at the shoulders. "Did you help the pilots?" His mother touched his sleeve, apologizing with a look. Nora turned, face softening by a shade. "I did my part," she said. "Others did theirs." "How do you know what to do when it feels scary?" he asked. Nora glanced toward the wing where de-icer filmed the metal like sea glass. "You learn the ground," she said. "You learn how wind talks. You listen longer than fear." He nodded, storing a rule he would not forget. Claire lingered, then drifted away, leaving a circle of quiet around 12F. A faint click moved along the cabin as the aircraft leveled, giving everyone a minute to think about what had just been rearranged. Memory brought its weather. Nora was small again on a slope above Rock Creek. Dawn still an idea. Cold cutting through wool while her father traced elk tracks with a gloved finger and asked what the snow said. Prince told time. Sharp edges meant fresh. Uttered rims meant hours. A tiny melt cupped in crust meant breath had warmed the air not long ago. She learned to test crust with the ball of her foot. To cross wind-scoured ice without chatter. To cut steps when the pitch said no, but the need said yes. She learned to read sky by taste, metal by touch, and the river's voice by tone, a low. Grown under ice meant safe passage. High glassy wine meant keep clear. Years later, those truths wore different uniforms and rode different radios. A slipped boot on shale taught her how falling begins and how stopping happens when you choose. The hold instead of panic. A whiteout on a pass taught her to move by inches, counting breaths, trusting the compass pressed into her palm more than eyes begging for shortcuts. A midnight search along a frozen ditch taught her how sound can hide a path, how heat from slow. Water draws a map you cannot see. Those rules lived inside her bones and kept pilots breathing on the night instruments lied. She closed her eyes for a beat, not to escape the cabin, but to let the mountains reset the frame. The boy whispered, "Thank you," then sat back, chest a little larger. Claire returned and tried a different line. "Is there anything you need?" "Everyone needs the same thing," Nora said. "A fair look." Claire nodded, understanding that gratitude sometimes works best without touch. Mark finally cleared his throat. The practiced baritone thinned. "Must be nice to have the whole base salute," he said, trying for humor and landing on envy. Nora turned a fraction. "It isn't nice," she said. "It's necessary." Different words. Mark stared at the safety card as if it might confirm. A friendlier world. Ethan kept his eyes down, cheeks warmer than the cabin warranted. The aircraft slid through a light veil of cloud and broke into clear air. Far below, icy braids of river stitched the valley into long seams of blue steel. Those lines tugged at Nora the way certain songs tug loose a buried day. She saw a kitchen. Window rattled by a gale, a stove clock refusing to hurry. Leather cracked from use, boot heels drying after a slog through waist-deep drifts. She saw a training course rigged along a ridge where wind could lift a thought out of your head if you didn't nail it down. An instructor once told her to count stars while holding plank on ice, not as punishment but as a way to weld attention to breath. She remembered the first time a cockpit voice reached her headphones in panic, and how she pushed her pulse down until it matched a metronome she could hold. Courage came from those ridges, those frozen bends, those nights where only patience kept people unbroken. Specks spread like something returned from storage. The great-empled man leaned in. "For what it's worth, I was wrong," Laura added. "Me too," then softened it. "I judged fast." Claire set a fresh napkin on Nora's tray like a small white flag. The boy's mother asked whether her son might write a school report about a person who helps flyers. Nora said, "Yes, keep names light, keep lessons strong." Mark muttered that some ceremonies are designed for cameras. Nobody answered. The hum filled the space. His remark left. Outside, the sky cleared, and the range appeared again, shoulders stacked in blue. Stone, peaks drawing clean lines as if a careful hand had inked them on glass. Nora followed those lines and let them settle her. She remembered standing under a canopy of stars close enough to tilt, listening for a broken engine while frost needled every seam of her jacket. She remembered guiding a lost jet toward warm air she could not see, only hear, and the exact moment a pilot's voice lost its shake. She remembered walking a rescued man toward a helicopter through snow so dry it squeaked like styrofoam. Breath tracking in white ribbons, relief arriving. Not as joy, but as quiet. That quiet felt present now, not triumphant, not loud, just sure. Claire leaned close to say thank you without apology attached. Nora answered with a nod. Passengers who had built their confidence on shine and status now regarded Nora as if she carried a compass they had misplaced. Ethan finally looked up and found no blame, only a face that did not need an audience. He whispered, almost to himself, "I didn't see. You didn't look," she said. He accepted that and tucked the lesson where a better habit might. Laura drafted a note she would post without a selfie, lines about humility and waiting before labeling a stranger. The boy drew constellations on his notepad, then held them up so Nora could see how he had connected points into a new animal. She smiled, small and real. Respect kept spreading, slow and deep. Few held back. Mark maintained that special access breeds theater. A middle-seat guest from another row claimed legends or marketing. A woman near the bulkhead asked if the salute had been part of rehearsal. Nora did not argue. If faith grows or doesn't, she returned her gaze to the wing where sunlight ran along the rivet line, pulsing like a heart on a monitor. The peaks slid past while the aircraft drew a clean path across cold air. Tension unknotted into something steadier, and conversation resumed. In a softer key, even laughter sounded new, the brittle edge gone. The napkin galaxy warmed in her pocket, as if it had learned to glow. She straightened the cup on the tray and exhaled. Know someone who proved everyone wrong? Tag them below. The engine settled into a long, even hum, and whispers drifted forward like thin weather while Missoula's winter slid backward under the wing. Faces angled toward 12F, some cautious, some sorry, some hungry for a story they had tried to label. Too fast, and Nora Evans sat with her hands still. The boy's folded galaxy warming her pocket, eyes on a narrow band where reflection and land shared the window. Frost retreated from the edge of glass. Below, river braids stitched pale ground into silver seams that unspooled toward flats and timber until the range thinned to ink. Business class found a slower grammar and let sharp words fall away. Claire Holt paused to Rose back, decided quiet. Could serve better than talk, and moved on. The gray-templed man cleaned his lenses and studied Nora as if she were a compass after too many wrong turns. Mark Reed pretended to sleep and didn't. Ethan Cole stared at his screen, watched alerts. Pile like drift and blinked without daring to breathe too loudly. Laura Miles tucked her phone beneath a shawl and tried to look smaller than a lens for once. Nora listened to the steady engine note and matched her breath to it, tension slipping past cabin noise to the edge of sky where land met white daylight. Montana fell away, but its tone stayed, the kind that cuts clutter and leaves only what endures. A soft clack sounded near the bulkhead. A man in civilian clothes rose from 2D, tall posture square in a way business trips rarely require. Hair cropped close. He waited while Claire eased the cart aside, then walked the aisle with measured care and stopped at 12F. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, steady, "Ensign Tyler Brooks. We have not met. We almost did." He produced a small, weathered logbook, wrapped with a rubber band, slid the band free, and opened to a winter page crowded with cramped lines. A bearing change. A ragged fuel state.
A note about warm air. Near a valley cut.
And a signature, N. Evans. He turned the book so she could read. "You built me a lane in the dark," he said, which told me to trust heat I could not feel yet. I felt it. I drank, leveled, and lived. Ethan stopped blinking. Laura forgot her angles. Claire steadied a hand on the galley wall and let herself listen. Nora touched the page once, not to claim, only to recognize, then pushed it gently back. "You flew it," she said. "On your voice," Brooks answered, drawing a coin from his pocket, dull at the rim, carried hard. No photo. "I just needed to close a loop." "Close it by helping the next one," she said. "Yes, ma'am." He looked as if he might stand at attention, decided respect could be quiet, and returned to his seat with a steadiness that told its own story. The aircraft slid east, while the range kept its counsel beneath a pale band of cloud. Ethan's dashboard, once a sedative, was filled with red pins and clipped notes from legal communications and to directors who preferred receipts to spin. A short clip already trended under a quiet hashtag, his line about a cheap set against. A ramp salute. Another post asked why a founder who preached culture practiced contempt. His head of communications sent a list, pause posts, decline interviews, and own the mistake without arguing intent. He typed an apology, deleted it, rewrote. In plainer words, and finally left the draft unsent, the cursor pulsing like a metronome that refused to flatter him. Across the aisle, sponsorship portals blinked on Laura's phone with language that did the job of saying no without confessing fear. One offered a call after a review window, another slid to pause, and a third unfollowed. Expedo, she opened a blank. Noten wrote the version she had never tried. I judged fast and wrong. I will wait before I aim a frame. No emojis, no photo. She pressed save and set the device face down like a vow. The great ampled man leaned over the aisle. For what? It is worth, he said. Thank you for the patience you never owed us. Nora nodded once and returned to the window, which answered with light and distance. Memory lifted in clean pieces as the plateau gave way to plains. She saw a shale slope above Rock Creek, boots biting in while wind tried to pry thought from. Skull, breath counting down through sleet. She saw a ridge where Aurora walked like a faint banner, and a radio whispered to failing voices into her palm. She saw a stove in a dark room, blue flame under a dented kettle, a map held flat by a mug, a plan sharpening each time the door rattled. She saw elk prints stitched across a sandbar at dawn. Edges crisp, meaning recent, and learned again how the ground speaks if you let it. Those hours had tanned her nerves to leather, and taught her to turn fear into small tasks and then do them. They rode with her now, without asking permission. Brooks lifted the logbook one more time, verified ink with a thumb, as if proof could fade, then tucked it away like a kept promise. The boy across the aisle pretended to sleep, then peered at Nora and smiled, blanket cape slipping down to his elbows. Claire folded a stray napkin into a square and placed it by Nora's cup, as if order itself were a thank you. The captain called light chop over the planes and asked for belts. Metal breathed. Cups ticked. The air found a new rhythm and kept it. Nora's fingers never tightened. Her attention walked ahead of the jet, over cloud and winter glare. To a far line, where rivers trade names for bridges and decisions make their weather, Washington's outline gathered in her mind, the river bend, the dome, the rows of stone where echoes cling. The long walk from curb to rooms that turn heat into policy. Purpose collected in her shoulders, a calm weight, not a drumbeat. Did not vanish. It stood inside her like bedrock under snow, carrying its old instructions. Breathe, read the wind, cut a lane, hold it. She blinked once, steady, and let the skyline rise without flinch. Montana lingered inside her like bedrock under snow, whispering the same instructions she had carried since childhood. Read the wind. Keep breathing, cut a lane, hold it, and when cities flicker ahead, walk in as if weather were watching. Ethan glanced toward Nora and found no gloat, only steadiness that made his posture feel manufactured. He turned the phone and finally wrote the note his board needed, one with fewer adjectives and more nouns. Laura adjusted her scarf, opened the camera, then closed it. Catching her reflection and deciding to leave the frame empty until habits improved. A murmur moved along the cabin, not gossip now, but recognition, the way voices change inside a church. Someone 2 rows back still called it a theater. Another said, survival rarely photographs correctly. Nora let both pass. The jet slid through a thin cloud and broke into clear air. Fields sharpened into winter squares. A river threw pewter under weak sun. Contrails crossed ahead. She set her shoulders, breathed once, and kept her eyes forward until Washington became. Lines and light rather than rumor, she did not change. The room did. The engine settled into a long, even hum, and whispers drifted forward like thin weather while Missoula's winter slid backward under the wing. Faces angled toward 12F, some cautious, some sorry, some hungry for a story they had tried to label. Too fast, and Nora Evans sat with her hands still. The boy's folded galaxy warming her pocket, eyes on a narrow band where reflection and land shared the window. Frost retreated from the edge of glass. Below, river braids stitched pale ground into silver seams that unspooled toward flats and timber until the range thinned to ink. Business class found a slower grammar and let sharp words fall away. Claire Holt paused to Rose back, decided quiet. Could serve better than talk, and moved on. The gray-templed man cleaned his lenses and studied Nora as if she were a compass after too many wrong turns. Mark Reed pretended to sleep and didn't. Ethan Cole stared at his screen, watched alerts. Pyle like drift and blinked without daring to breathe too loudly. Laura Miles tucked her phone beneath a shawl and tried to look smaller than a lens for once. Nora listened to the steady engine note and matched her breath to it, tension slipping past cabin noise to the edge of sky where land met white daylight. Montana fell away, but its tone stayed, the kind that cuts clutter and leaves only what endures. A soft clack sounded near the bulkhead. A man in civilian clothes rose from 2D, tall posture square in a way business trips rarely require. Hair cropped close. He waited while Claire eased the cart aside, then walked the aisle with measured care and stopped at 12F. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, steady, "Ensign Tyler Brooks. We have not met. We almost did." He produced a small, weathered logbook, wrapped with a rubber band, slid the band free, and opened to a winter page crowded with cramped lines. A bearing change. A ragged fuel state.
A note about warm air. Near a valley cut.
And a signature, N. Evans. He turned the book so she could read. "You built me a lane in the dark," he said. "She told me to trust heat I could not feel yet." I felt it. I drank, leveled, and lived. Ethan stopped blinking. Laura forgot her angles. Claire steadied a hand on the galley wall and let herself listen. Nora touched the page once, not to claim, only to recognize, then pushed it gently back. "You flew it," she said. "On your voice," Brooks answered, drawing a coin from his pocket, dull at the rim, carried hard. No photo. "I just needed to close a loop." "Close it by helping the next one," she said. "Yes, ma'am." He looked as if he might. Stand at attention, decided respect could be quiet, and returned to his seat with a steadiness that told its own story. The aircraft slid east, while the range kept its counsel beneath a pale band of cloud. Ethan's dashboard, once a sedative, was filled with red pins and clipped notes from legal communications and to directors who preferred receipts to spin. A short clip already trended under a quiet hashtag, his line about a cheap set against. A ramp salute. Another post asked why a founder who preached culture practiced contempt. His head of communications sent a list, pause posts, decline interviews, and own the mistake without arguing intent. He typed an apology, deleted it, rewrote. In plainer words, and finally left the draft unsent, the cursor pulsing like a metronome that refused to flatter him. Across the aisle, sponsorship portals blinked on Laura's phone with language that did the job of saying no without confessing fear. One offered a call after a review window, another slid to pause, and a third unfollowed. Expedo, she opened a blank. Noten wrote the version she had never tried. "I judged fast and wrong. I will wait before I aim a frame." No emojis, no photo. She pressed save and set the device face down like a vow. The great-empled man leaned over the aisle. "For what?" "It is worth," he said. "Thank you for the patience you never owed us." Nora nodded once and returned to the window, which answered with light and distance. Memory lifted in clean pieces as the plateau gave way to plains. She saw a shale slope above Rock Creek, boots biting in while wind tried to pry thought from. Skull, breath counting down through sleet. She saw a ridge where Aurora walked like a faint banner, and a radio whispered to failing voices into her palm. She saw a stove in a dark room, blue flame under a dented kettle, a map held flat by a mug, a plan sharpening each time the door rattled. She saw elk prints stitched across a sandbar at dawn. Edges crisp, meaning recent, and learned again how the ground speaks if you let it. Those hours had tanned her nerves to leather and taught her to turn fear into small tasks and then do them. They rode with her now, without asking permission. Brooks lifted the logbook one more time, verified ink with a thumb, as if proof could fade, then tucked it away like a kept promise. The boy across the aisle pretended to sleep, then peered at Nora and smiled, blanket cape slipping down to his elbows. Claire folded a stray napkin into a square and placed it by Nora's cup, as if order itself were a thank you. The captain called light chop over the planes and asked for belts. Metal breathed. Cups ticked. The air found a new rhythm and kept it. Nora's fingers never tightened. Her attention walked ahead of the jet, over cloud and winter glare. To a far line, where rivers trade names for bridges and decisions make their weather, Washington's outline gathered in her mind, the river bend, the dome, the rows of stone where echoes cling. The long walk from curb to rooms that turn heat into policy. Purpose collected in her shoulders, a calm weight, not a drumbeat. Did not vanish. It stood inside her like bedrock under snow, carrying its old instructions. Breathe, read the wind, cut a lane, hold it. She blinked once, steady, and let the skyline rise without flinch. Montana lingered inside her like bedrock under snow, whispering the same instructions she had carried since childhood. Read the wind. Keep breathing, cut a lane, hold it, and when cities flicker ahead, walk in as if weather were watching. Ethan glanced toward Nora and found no gloat, only steadiness that made his posture feel manufactured. He turned the phone and finally wrote the note his board needed, one with fewer adjectives and more nouns. Laura adjusted her scarf, opened the camera, then closed it. Catching her reflection and deciding to leave the frame empty until habits improved. A murmur moved along the cabin. Not gossip now, but recognition. The way voices change inside a church. Someone 2 rows back still called it a theater. Another said, survival rarely photographs correctly. Nora let both pass. The jet slid through a thin cloud and broke into clear air. Fields sharpened into winter squares. A river threw pewter under weak sun. Contrails crossed ahead. She set her shoulders, breathed once, and kept her eyes forward until Washington became. Lines and light rather than rumor, she did not change. The room did.